If you read the description of this morning's sermon in the church newsletter, it is possible that you thought the title was a typo. Both Microsoft Word and Google Sheets certainly thought so. As I attempted to type Humanicy, my made-up word was repeatedly auto-corrected to humanity. The title, however, is not a typo. It is a term I coined during my senior year at College of Charleston, when one of my professors offered the class extra credit if we wrote a short story or poem addressing one of the themes covered in class that semester. After a great deal of thought, I finally settled on the theme of theodicy, which is the question: if there is a just and loving God, how can suffering and injustice exist? And this is the story that I came up with. Humanicy, short story written by a much younger Clint Tawes. The door of an African-themed coffee shop swings open as a chime announces the arrival of 3 College of Charleston students who race to secure their place in a dimly lit corner before placing their orders. The barista struggles to hold her fake smile while she takes an overly specific order she committed to memory long ago and tries to ignore the condescending tone from the 3 customers she has come to despise. The 3 met during the first week of freshman year. Andrea, whose name had previously been Andrea, until she changed it on a flight from rural Ohio to start her new life as a college student. James, who hadn't changed his name since moving to Charleston from upstate South Carolina, but sometime during his sophomore year, the spelling switched from the common James to Jayms because he felt inclined to reject the conformist spelling chosen by his parents. And Sarah, a Charleston native. Neither the spelling nor pronunciation of her name had changed, but only because she awaited a future day in which a shaman would bestow a spirit name upon her. The 3 became fast friends and cemented their friendship with a thrice weekly visit to Kudu Coffee House, which they had chosen because of their love for African culture and because Starbucks did not support free trade. And although none of the 3 knew what that meant, they were resolved that they would not support it. Meeting at this sacred space was a self-care ritual, time sanctified to vent the frustrations of this trinity of social justice, forced to live in an unjust world. After placing their order, Andrea, James, and James do a slow hot coffee carrying walk to their corner, and the trio simultaneously fall into the plush vintage furniture, sighing and moaning to announce their exasperation. Andrea is the first to speak on a topic that has been bubbling within her soul since 2 days ago when, on her way to Chai, the spot in Charleston for tapas, she had passed a homeless man begging for spare change, which of course she didn't have because, who carries cash these days, right? Nevertheless, she offered the man a shamanic blessing of great wealth, spiritual wealth that is. And although she had done all she could to enrich this poor soul, Andrea remained troubled in her spirit about the plight of the homeless, not only in Charleston, but throughout the world. Not to change the subject, James interjected as he changed the subject to what he felt were more pressing matters of global concern, specifically the genocide taking place in Darfur. This was a cause near to James' heart for 2 weeks now, ever since he purchased a green Save Darfur cause bracelet from a street vendor. As he spoke, James lifted his hand, gesticulating in a manner that not only showed his passion, but also his green cause bracelet, to his 2 friends and the other patrons of the coffee shop, who, at least in James' mind, were all listening intently. In his rant, James was careful to avoid mentioning certain aspects regarding the atrocities occurring in Darfur, trivial details, of course, that he hadn't had time to learn, such as who was doing the killing in Darfur, who was being killed, what started the conflict, and exactly where Darfur is. After James had spouted all the talking points he had rehearsed prior to today's coffee shop meeting, he took a self-satisfied pause to sip his coffee, allowing Sarah an opportunity to finally speak. As troubling as these issues are, she lamented while clutching her chest to express her anguish, I am most troubled today by the impact of racism on communities of color. James and Sarah both grimaced and nodded like church ladies taking in a sermon as Sarah preached about the lack of equal opportunities, quality housing, healthcare, and access to resources within minority communities right here in Charleston. Although she spoke truthfully and zealously, she spoke of what she had heard, but not actually witnessed, because despite being born and raised in Charleston, she had never actually visited any of the neighborhoods she discussed so passionately, except one time when she was 6 years old and her father took a wrong turn off Meeting Street, prompting him to lock the doors of their BMW while making a quick 3-point turn. Such injustice, Andrea exclaimed while brushing an imaginary tear from her cheek. So much suffering, Sarah cried. So true, said James, pausing to lift his hand to display his green Save Darfur cause bracelet. The question of theodicy, he continued, intentionally using a word he had just learned in his philosophy class, can only be answered by atheism. If there were a loving and just God, the injustice we speak of simply could not exist. Meanwhile, another bell chimes as the door to a coffee shop opens, this time in an ethereal location, a land known by many names: Paradise, Beulah Land, New Jerusalem, but most commonly called Heaven. 3 young angels enter the heavenly coffee shop, place their orders, and secure their place on plush clouds in the corner. The 3 angels, Michael, Gabriel, and Lucifer, have been friends since long before they earned their wings and halos from the Elysian University an eternity ago. As they sip their beverages, small talk becomes more serious as Gabriel poses a taboo question. Do humans really exist? While none of the 3 had ever actually seen a human or visited this supposedly real place called Earth, it was the orthodox belief among the population of heaven that humans and Earth did exist. This was emphasized in every angel course at Elysian University. In fact, one could not receive his or her wings without acknowledging the existence of Earth and humans. More importantly, it was well known that anyone who denied human existence risked being blacklisted by God himself, who threw the most fabulous dinner parties in all of heaven. Quiet, Michael loud whispered. Someone might hear you. There's an amazing dinner party this Sunday. But, he leaned in and whispered, I have heard that these humans allow some of their own kind to go without food. What? Gabriel asked in astonishment. Have they no hands to grow enough food for everyone? That's just it, Michael answered. They have hands, fully functioning hands, as well as legs and feet, and they have plenty of food. In fact, they throw away as much of it as they eat. And still they allow others to starve or live in food deserts where their only sustenance is food that makes them sick. And I have heard, Gabrielle whispered as she looked around and leaned in even closer, that some humans who do become sick cannot get access to health care. But they have doctors, hospitals, and medicines, do they not? Michael asked. They do, Gabrielle affirmed. They have all these things, but the richest humans fear that if all humans have access to doctors and medicines, it might affect the quality of their care or the amount of their paychecks. So they're content to allow some to suffer or die so they are not inconvenienced. Michael shook his head in disbelief, then added, would you believe that they even deny equal rights to some people based on the color of their skin or who they love? Some humans actually believe their neighborhoods are less safe if humans with more melanin live there. Some even think their marriages and families will be harmed by allowing people of the same sex to marry and raise families. Are you serious? Interrupted Gabrielle. You're telling me humans have fully functioning brains and they actually believe such nonsense? That's what I'm told, Michael replied in a matter-of-fact tone, as both he and Gabrielle realized that as they were dominating the conversation, their friend Lucifer had been sitting silently, but turning red as the devil. Humans, Lucifer shouted loudly enough for God and everyone to hear. Let me tell you about humans. They kill one another over resources rather than sharing them. They fight over matters as trivial as the name of God and how to get into heaven, as if God would ever invite such violent beasts to one of his dinner parties. In fact, I've been told that God once even considered inviting them, and he sent his son to offer the invitation, but he returned with badly scarred hands and feet, and he's been in counseling for severe PTSD ever since. And to make matters worse, some of them actually call me a devil and blame me for all the evil in the world. Then Lucifer uttered words that would banish him from not only God's dinner parties, but from all of heaven. I don't care what we've been taught all our eternal lives. There is no way that there could be such violence, suffering, and injustice in a world populated with beings created in the image of God, beings with hands and feet to help others, minds to solve problems, and hearts capable of caring. Humans, Lucifer boldly declared, simply do not exist. Reading my short story over a decade after it was written, I realized that it is flawed in several ways. First of all, some of the issues in the story have changed. The conflict that led to ethnic cleansing in Darfur has ended, but war and genocide certainly have not. The Affordable Care Act has made healthcare more accessible, but it is not universally accessible to all Americans. and marriage equality is, at least for now, the law of the land. But LGBTQ citizens still face hate and bigotry from our fellow citizens and our elected leaders. And some of the story's themes remain unchanged: homelessness, racism, war, and poverty. The intent of the story is to point a satirical finger at a particular group of people. But before I discuss the target of satire, let me first make it clear who is not the target. The target is not the agents of injustice who create suffering and injustice throughout the world. It is not the insurance companies who profit from a society where healthcare is not universally accessible to all people. It is not the military-industrial complex who see financial incentive in war rather than the loss and destruction it brings. It is not those who stoke bigotry and hate against the LGBTQ community, nor is it those who openly endorse or deny the reality of systemic racism and its effect on Black and brown people and communities. Although each of these groups is a perfectly acceptable candidate for ridicule, they are just too easy and obvious a target. Although one of the human characters announces his newfound disbelief in God at the end of the first part of the story, I also want to be quite clear that atheists are not the target of satire within the story. I will admit that one of the most surprising aspects of becoming a Unitarian Universalist was discovering that there were members of my church who were agnostic or atheist. Before this, I had no clue that there were atheists who went to church, much less those who were devout and faithful members of a church. But I have come to have a profound respect for individuals who are unsure about or who do not believe in the existence of a God, and especially high esteem for those who, despite uncertainty or disbelief in God, still do what the prophet Micah says God requires: to do justice and to love mercy. In fact, if credit were awarded for the work of justice, I would say at the bottom of the list are those who do the work because they believe there is a God who will reward them for the work or punish them for failing to do so. Then just above that would be individuals like me who believe there is a God, but who don't believe there is any eternal punishment. And if there is a heavenly reward, everyone gets the reward. But at the top of the list, I would say the greatest reward goes to those who do what is right, even though they don't believe it is required of them by any supernatural force who will either reward or punish them. What is important in the story is not that the character concludes that there is no God, but rather why he comes to this conclusion. If he had come to this conclusion for lack of evidence of God's existence, or because science offers explanations for the phenomena previously explained through theism, I would understand his reasoning, especially since I have wrestled with the same questions despite coming to a different conclusion. The intent of my story is not to disparage those who do not believe in the existence of God, but to point out the fallacy of blaming or denying the existence of God because of injustice created by mankind and inaction on the part of mankind to eradicate injustice. The question of theodicy, I believe, is the wrong question. Why point an accusing finger toward the heavens for problems here on earth? Why would we expect God to solve problems created by humans? Why would we look for an unseen hand rather than human hands and feet, the human mind and the human hearts given to us by, depending on your belief, either God or evolution to solve the problems of this world? The better question is the question posed by the story's angelic characters. How is it possible for such violence, suffering, and injustice to exist in a world populated with beings created in the image of God? Beings with hands and feet to help others, minds to solve problems, and hearts capable of caring for others. What we should ask is not the question of theodicy, but the question of humanicy. If I had written this story in the current decade rather than 2008, I would most likely have described my human characters as woke. This is a term that's received a great deal of attention lately, especially among those who see it as a negative term. I do not understand why anyone would consider it a bad thing to be aware of and attentive to social injustice. But the students in the coffee shop are not satirized in the story for being woke. They are satirized for being inactive. Let me be clear, being woke is a good thing, but only if you are active. Throughout my life until very recently, I could always sleep at any time and any place, whether day or night, in my bed, in a car, a bus, a plane, in the library many times during exam week at College of Charleston. No matter how many cups of coffee I have had, and I drink coffee morning, noon, and night, I could always sleep when I wanted to. But a few months ago, for the first time in my life, I experienced insomnia. The first time it happened, for 2 nights, I lay wide awake in bed, unable to fall asleep. That first time was the worst, but since then, I find myself waking up around 1 or 2 in the morning, unable to fall asleep again for a few hours. I don't know if it's something that occurs with age or why this has suddenly begun happening to me, but it is a miserable experience to be awake while lying in bed. The characters in my story were awake to the reality of injustice, of poverty, violence, and racism, but they were lying in their metaphorical beds rather than getting up and doing something about the injustice they saw around them and throughout the world. To soothe their conscience, the characters asked themselves the question of theodicy, because although this question has been one of the most difficult to answer by theologians and philosophers throughout the ages, it is not the hard question. The hard question is the question of humanity. How can humans exist in a world of injustice and suffering? How can humans be aware of injustice and suffering and remain idle? My sermon, much like my story, poses a question, but it does not offer an answer. So I challenge you to take this question with you, to ponder it. And I pray that by pondering this question, it helps us to become more active, and that we can help, and that we can then help to make our world more just. Amen, and may it be so.